Beneath a loose floorboard in Block 11 of Auschwitz-Birkenau, a prisoner scraped words onto a scrap of cement bag with a stolen pencil stub. Above him, boots echoed in the corridor. One word at a time, one breath at a time. The penalty for what he was doing was immediate execution. He wrote anyway. This is the story of Zalman Gradowski, a man who knew he would die but refused to let the truth die with him. Between 1942 and 1944, he buried his words beneath the ashes of the crematorium where he was forced to work. His diary would spend decades underground, surviving fire, flood, and time itself. When it was finally discovered, it would become one of the most significant first-hand accounts of the Holocaust ever found. But how did fragile paper survive when millions of people did not? There are thousands of books about World War II. Chapter 2. Histories written by generals, memoirs from soldiers, academic analyses from scholars who studied the war from safe distances. But the most powerful testimonies come from a different source entirely, from those who lived inside the nightmare and had the courage to document it, knowing they might never be read. Hidden diaries, secret journals, scraps of testimony buried in walls, under floors, in bottles beneath the earth. These are the voices that survived when their authors did not. These are the documents that captured not just what happened, but what it felt like to be human in the midst of inhuman cruelty. If you're here for the stories that textbooks leave out, the testimonies that bring history to life in the most raw and honest way possible, subscribe now. This is where we excavate the truth buried beneath the official narratives. Zalman Gradowski was not a writer by profession. He was a teacher from Suwałki, a small city in northeastern Poland near the Lithuanian border. Born in 1907, he grew up in a thriving Jewish community, married a woman named Sonia, and lived a quiet, ordinary life. He taught children. He celebrated Sabbath with his family. He had no reason to believe that his world would end. September 1939. Germany invaded Poland. 2 weeks later, the Soviet Union invaded from the east. Suwałki found itself in the crossfire of two totalitarian powers. For Jews, there was no safe direction to run. By 1942, the Nazi occupation had transformed Poland into a landscape of terror. Ghettos were established, liquidated, and refilled. Mass deportations began. The word resettlement became a euphemism for something far darker. Zalman, Sonia, and their extended family, parents, siblings, cousins, were rounded up and forced onto cattle cars heading west. They were told they were going to work camps. Labor, they were promised, nothing more. The train traveled for days in suffocating darkness, bodies pressed together, no food, no water, the air thick with fear and the waste of desperate people. When the doors finally opened, they saw the sign, Auschwitz-Birkenau, December 8, 1942. Zalman Gradowski stepped off the train onto the selection platform. SS officers walked the line, pointing left or right with casual indifference. Right meant labor. Left meant immediate death in the gas chambers, though the new arrivals didn't know that yet. Zalman was young, healthy, able-bodied. He was sent right. His wife Sonia, his mother, his sisters, they were sent left. Within hours of arriving at Auschwitz, Zalman Gradowski lost everyone he loved. And then he learned what the smoke rising from the chimneys really meant. He was assigned to the Sonderkommando, the special squad of Jewish prisoners forced to work in the gas chambers and crematoria. Their job was unspeakable: to lead victims into the chambers, to remove the bodies afterward, to burn them, to scatter the ashes. The Nazis used Jews to destroy Jews, knowing this work would destroy the workers too. Sonderkommando members were kept isolated from other prisoners and were themselves regularly killed and replaced to eliminate witnesses. Zalman Gradowski understood immediately that he was living on borrowed time. The Nazis would not let him survive. He would die in this place. But he made a decision in those first horrific days, a decision that would echo across decades. If he could not survive, then his testimony would. Someone had to record what was happening. Someone had to preserve the truth. And so, in the darkest place on earth, Zalman Gradowski began to write. It started with a scrap of paper, not a notebook. Those didn't exist in Auschwitz. Not a journal with leather binding and clean pages, just a torn piece of cement bag, rough and gray, found in the construction debris near the crematoria. Zalman smoothed it out, folded it carefully, and hid it in his pocket. The pencil was harder to acquire. Pencils were valuable, controlled, counted. But in Auschwitz, everything had a black market. Prisoners traded bread for razors, buttons for needles, lives for temporary comfort. Zalman traded his already meager food ration for a pencil stub, barely 2 inches long, worn down to the wood. Late at night, when exhaustion should have pulled him into oblivion, Zalman Gradowski wrote. He wrote in Yiddish, his native tongue, the language of his murdered family. He wrote not for himself, but for whoever might find these words after the war, if there was an after. His first entries documented the mechanics of death, the arrival of transports, the lies told to the victims as they entered the gas chambers. You're going to shower. Leave your belongings here. You'll get them back after. The sounds from inside the chambers, the silence that followed, the work that came after. He wrote with clinical precision, forcing himself to document details that his mind wanted to forget. But he also wrote about something else, something the Nazis never expected anyone to record. He wrote about the humanity that persisted in the midst of atrocity, the whispered prayers, the acts of kindness between prisoners, the sharing of a crust of bread, the resistance, however small, the determination to remain human when everything was designed to strip that humanity away. I am writing this in a state of insanity, he wrote in one entry, in a place where all that is human and divine has been trampled. And yet he kept writing, because to stop writing was to surrender completely, to accept that this horror would remain undocumented, unchallenged, unknown. Writing was not just dangerous, it was a death sentence. The SS guards who ran Auschwitz-Birkenau understood the power of testimony. They understood that witnesses were dangerous. That's why the Sonderkommando were regularly liquidated. That's why prisoners found with contraband, especially paper, pencils, anything that could document the camp, were executed immediately, often publicly, as a warning to others. Zalman wrote, knowing that every word could be his last. He wrote in stolen moments, during the brief hours when the crematoria weren't operating, in the minutes before dawn when the guards changed shifts, in the chaos of new transports when the SS were distracted by the logistics of mass murder. But writing was only half the challenge. Hiding the diary was the other half, and it required constant ingenuity. He couldn't keep the pages on his body. Prisoners were subject to random searches, and their uniforms had no real pockets. He couldn't hide them in the barracks. Those were inspected regularly, bunks torn apart, mattresses sliced open. So Zalman created a network of hiding places throughout the camp, locations he could access during his work, but that the SS wouldn't think to search. Beneath floorboards in the undressing rooms next to the gas chambers, where victims left their clothes before entering the chambers. Inside, cracks in the crematorium walls, gaps in the brickwork that could swallow folded papers, under loose stones in the courtyard where ashes were dumped. Each hiding place held different pages, different entries, so that if one cache was discovered, the entire diary wouldn't be lost. He wasn't alone in this work. Other Sonderkommando members were writing too. Leib Langfuss, Chaim Hermann. They wrote separately but with a shared understanding. These testimonies had to survive even if they didn't. They helped each other, covering for one another during writing sessions, creating diversions during hiding operations, but the danger escalated constantly. January 1943. An SS guard noticed a prisoner acting suspiciously near the crematorium wall. A search revealed several pages of testimony written in Polish. The prisoner was taken to Block 11, the death block, and shot. The pages were burned. Zalman heard about it that night and added 3 more hiding places to his network. Spring 1943. A major inspection was announced. All Sonderkommando members were ordered out of the crematoria, while SS officers and specially trained dogs searched for contraband. Zalman had written 15 pages by this point, hidden in 7 different locations. He lay awake the night before the inspection, wondering which caches would be discovered, which parts of his testimony would vanish. The dogs sniffed. The guards searched. They found stolen food, a hidden razor, a small prayer book. But they missed the diary pages. All of them. Zalman's hands shook for hours afterward. Still, he kept writing. Because what was the alternative? To let the Nazis control not just their lives, but the historical record? To allow this crime to go undocumented? Unthinkable. If this story is revealing something you never learned in school, something that challenges how you understand history, hit that like button. These testimonies matter, and they're still being discovered today. By summer 1943, Zalman's diary had evolved from scattered notes into something more deliberate and profound. He was no longer just documenting events. He was writing for posterity, for future generations, who would need to understand not just what happened, but why it mattered. He wrote letters to the future, addressed to no one and everyone. To those who find these words, one entry began, "I write from the lowest depths of hell. If you are reading this, it means I am already dead. It means you are living in a world that defeated this evil. Please, do not forget us." His entries became more philosophical, wrestling with impossible questions. How could human beings do this to other human beings? Where was God in this place? How could goodness exist alongside such evil? He wrote about witnessing mothers holding their children as they entered the gas chambers, about old men reciting Kaddish with their last breaths, about teenagers who fought back even when resistance was futile. He also documented the inner workings of the Nazi killing machine with devastating precision. The number of transports arriving each day, the efficiency improvements made to the gas chambers, the quotas for cremation, the disposal of belongings, the extraction of gold teeth. He wrote these details knowing they were evidence that would be needed to prove what happened here, to hold perpetrators accountable, to ensure that denial would be impossible. But the diary was also deeply personal. He wrote about his wife, Sonia, about their last morning together before the deportation, the breakfast she'd made, the way she'd looked at him when the soldiers came. He wrote about his mother's hands, his sister's laugh, his father's prayers. He kept them alive in words even as their bodies turned to ash. Fall 1943. A new transport arrived from Białystok. Among the prisoners were people from Suwałki, Zalman's hometown. They brought news. His brother had survived, at least for a time, in another camp. His cousin had escaped to the forests and joined the partisans. These fragments of information gave Zalman renewed purpose. If some of his family had survived, then his testimony mattered even more. It was a gift he could give them. The truth about what happened to the others. He wrote faster now, more urgently. The diary expanded to dozens of pages, then hundreds. Each one a risk, each one a small victory against oblivion. October 1944. The Soviet army was advancing from the east. The Nazis, facing inevitable defeat, began evacuating camps and destroying evidence of their crimes. At Auschwitz-Birkenau, this meant one thing: the Sonderkommando would soon be liquidated. They knew too much. They'd seen too much. They couldn't be allowed to testify. The prisoners knew it too. Whispers spread through the barracks. They were going to be killed soon, all of them, before the Soviets arrived. The question was whether to wait passively for death or to resist. October 7, 1944. The Sonderkommando staged an uprising. It was a desperate, doomed rebellion. Prisoners attacked SS guards with makeshift weapons, hammers, axes, crowbars stolen from the construction sites. One group managed to blow up Crematorium 4 using explosives smuggled in by female prisoners from the Union munitions factory. The explosion shook the camp. For a brief, impossible moment, the machinery of death stopped working. Zalman Gradowski participated in the uprising. He fought not because he believed he would survive, but because he refused to die passively. The battle was short and brutal. The SS brought reinforcements, machine guns, dogs. Within hours, the uprising was crushed. Over 450 Sonderkommando members were killed, shot in the courtyards and barracks where they'd lived and worked. Zalman Gradowski died on October 7, 1944, during the uprising. He was 37 years old. He'd survived 2 years in the Sonderkommando, far longer than most, and had written over 300 pages of testimony documenting the unimaginable. But before the uprising began, Zalman did one final, crucial thing. He gathered all the diary pages he could reach, placed them in metal containers and glass bottles, sealed them carefully, and buried them in the ground near Crematorium 3. He marked the location in ways only someone searching deliberately would notice: specific stones, alignments with existing structures, subtle indicators. Then he went to fight. And he died, knowing his words might survive, even if he didn't. January 27, 1945. Soviet troops liberated Auschwitz-Birkenau. The Nazis had fled days earlier, taking prisoners who could still walk on death marches westward. Behind them, they left chaos. Buildings partially burned, evidence destroyed or scattered, thousands of sick and dying prisoners, and a landscape of death so vast it defied comprehension. In the days after liberation, Soviet soldiers, survivors, and eventually forensic teams began searching the camp for evidence. They found mountains of belongings: suitcases, shoes, eyeglasses, human hair. They found the gas chambers, the crematoria, the execution walls. But they didn't immediately find the hidden testimonies. The ground where Zalman had buried his diary was contaminated with ash, debris, and destruction. The metal containers and bottles were underground, invisible, waiting. The first cache was discovered in March 1945. A Polish investigator searching near the ruins of Crematorium 3 noticed disturbed earth and dug. He found a metal container, rusted and partially damaged. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were pages of Yiddish text written in cramped handwriting. The pages were stained, some partially illegible, but intact. More discoveries followed over the decades. In 1952, another container was found near Crematorium 2. In 1962, A glass bottle containing testimony from Leib Langfuss was unearthed during construction work. In 1970, another cache, this one containing some of Zalman's philosophical writings. But the most significant discovery came in 1980. Workers renovating the area around Crematorium 3 found a large metal canister buried 2 feet underground. Inside were over 200 pages from Zalman Gradowski's diary, including his letters to the future, his documentation of specific transports, and his personal reflections on bearing witness. The pages had survived 35 years underground. Moisture had damaged some sections, rendering them partially illegible. Insects had eaten corners. Time had faded the pencil marks, but the core of the testimony remained. Readable, devastating, essential. Historians and conservators worked carefully to preserve and translate the documents. The Yiddish text was painstakingly transcribed. Damaged sections were analyzed with modern technology, ultraviolet light, digital enhancement, microscopic examination to recover faded words. What emerged was one of the most complete and powerful first-hand accounts of the Holocaust ever discovered. Unlike testimonies given decades after the war, filtered through memory and trauma, Zalman's diary was written in real time. It captured not just events, but the emotional and psychological reality of living through the unthinkable. His words had survived the very machinery they described. The crematoria that burned millions of bodies couldn't burn his testimony. The Nazi attempt to erase all evidence of their crimes failed, at least in part, because of prisoners like Zalman, who refused to let the truth be buried. Why does this matter? What would you have done in Zalman's place? Risk everything to write the truth, or focus solely on surviving another day? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every one, and these conversations help us understand what courage really means. The discovery and publication of Zalman Gradowski's diary transformed Holocaust historiography. Before these hidden testimonies were found, historians relied primarily on 3 sources: testimony from survivors who gave evidence after the war, documents from the perpetrators, and physical evidence from the camps. Each source had limitations. Survivor testimony, while invaluable, was shaped by decades of trauma and memory. Perpetrator documents were often euphemistic, using coded language designed to obscure the reality of mass murder. Physical evidence could show what happened, but not what it felt like. Zalman's diary, and others like it, provided something different. They offered immediate, unfiltered testimony from inside the killing centers. They captured the psychological reality of victims and prisoners in their own words, written while the horror was happening. They couldn't be dismissed as faulty memory or post-war construction. They were evidence in the purest form. Scholars studying the diary made several crucial discoveries. First, Zalman documented specific details that contradicted Nazi attempts to minimize their crimes. He recorded the number of people killed on specific days, the efficiency of different killing methods, the disposal of bodies. His observations matched and often exceeded official estimates, providing independent verification of the Holocaust's scale. Second, his philosophical and emotional reflections revealed something profound about resistance. He showed that bearing witness was itself an act of defiance, that maintaining one's humanity, writing poetry, offering comfort, preserving memory, was a form of resistance as powerful as physical rebellion. Third, his letters to the future created a direct emotional connection between the past and present. When you read Zalman writing, "If you are reading this, I am already dead," but these words prove I existed, that we all existed. You're not reading about history. You're receiving a message sent specifically to you across 80 years. It's impossible to remain emotionally distant from that. The diary was published in Polish in 1977, in Hebrew in 1985, and in English in 2017 as part of The Scrolls of Auschwitz. Museums included excerpts in exhibitions. Educators used passages in Holocaust curricula. Zalman Gradowski, murdered in 1944, became a teacher again, this time teaching the entire world. His testimony has been cited in war crimes trials, academic research, memorial projects, and countless educational programs. It's been read at commemorations, quoted in speeches, and referenced in films and documentaries. The Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum preserves the original pages in climate-controlled archives, treating them with the reverence reserved for sacred texts, because in a way, they are sacred. They're the closest thing we have to the voices of those who died in the gas chambers, preserved by someone who witnessed their last moments and refused to let them be forgotten. Other hidden testimonies have been discovered over the years, each one adding to our understanding. But Zalman's remains one of the most comprehensive and powerful. His determination to document not just events, but meaning, not just facts, but feelings, created a testament that transcends historical record and becomes something more. A bridge between the dead and the living, between the past and the present, between what happened and what we choose to remember. Zalman Gradowski's diary exists within a broader tradition of hidden Holocaust testimonies, each with its own story of survival against impossible odds. There's the Ringelblum Archive, the Oneg Shabbat Chronicles from the Warsaw Ghetto, thousands of pages documenting daily life and resistance, buried in milk cans and metal boxes, partially recovered after the war. There are diaries from Theresienstadt, Vilna, Łódź. There are poems written on scraps of paper and hidden in walls, recipes recorded by starving women to preserve pre-war memories, children's drawings smuggled out of camps. Each of these documents represents someone who refused to let the Nazis control the narrative, who understood that testimony was both evidence and resistance, who risked everything to preserve truth. But Zalman's diary has a particular power because of where it was written. The Sonderkommando occupied a unique and horrifying position, forced to participate in the machinery of death, isolated from other prisoners, living with the knowledge that they would be killed to silence their testimony. They had every reason to simply survive day by day, to shut down emotionally, to focus only on staying alive as long as possible. Instead, multiple Sonderkommando members, Zalman Gradowski, Leib Langfuss, Chaim Hermann, and others, chose to write. They chose to document. They chose to believe that their words might survive even when they knew they wouldn't. That choice has implications far beyond World War II. It speaks to the power of testimony in the face of atrocity, to the importance of documentation even when the act of documentation is dangerous, to the human need to be remembered, to matter, to have existed. Modern human rights work relies on this same principle, that bearing witness is both an ethical imperative and a practical tool. That dictators and war criminals fear documentation because it limits their ability to rewrite history. That every testimony preserved is evidence that might someday be used for justice. Zalman Gradowski couldn't prevent the Holocaust. He couldn't save his family. He couldn't save himself. But he could write, and that act, small, dangerous, persistent, ensured that the truth would survive. In 1944, Zalman Gradowski wrote these words, "The crematoria are destroying evidence. The ashes scatter in the wind. The Nazis believe they will leave no trace, but they are wrong. We are writing. We are hiding our words in the earth, and someday Someone will find them. He was right. The crematoria of Auschwitz-Birkenau destroyed over 1 million bodies. The Nazis demolished buildings, burned documents, scattered ashes, tried to erase all evidence of their crimes. But they couldn't destroy words buried deep enough, protected carefully enough, written urgently enough. Zalman's diary survived because he understood something fundamental. Testimony is powerful not because it prevents atrocity. He knew his words wouldn't save him, but because it prevents erasure. It ensures that crimes cannot be denied, victims cannot be forgotten, and truth cannot be permanently buried. Today, you can read Zalman Gradowski's words. You can read his letters to the future, his documentation of the unthinkable, his philosophical wrestling with meaning in the midst of meaninglessness. You can receive the message he sent across 8 decades, sealed in metal, buried in contaminated earth, preserved by sheer determination. When you read his diary, you're doing exactly what he hoped someone would do. You're bearing witness to his bearing witness. You're ensuring that his death, and the deaths of everyone he wrote about, were not in vain. This is why hidden testimonies matter. Why we search for them, preserve them, read them, share them. Because they're not just historical documents. They're messages sent from people who knew they were dying, but refused to let the truth die with them. Zalman Gradowski died fighting on October 7, 1944. But his words lived on. They waited underground through winter and spring, through liberation and rebuilding, through decades of silence. And when they finally emerged, they told the truth that he'd risked everything to preserve. That's the power of testimony. That's the power of resistance. That's the power of refusing to let cruelty have the final word. If this story moved you, if it revealed something you didn't know, if it made you think about the importance of preserving truth even in the darkest times, subscribe to this channel. These are the stories we need. The voices from history that teach us what courage looks like, what resistance means, and why documentation matters. Hit that notification bell. Explore our other videos about hidden histories and untold testimonies from World War II. 2. And remember Zalman Gradowski, not just as a victim, but as a witness, a writer, a teacher who refused to let the truth die. His words survived the crematoria. They survived the Nazis. They survived time itself. And now, they survive through us, everyone who reads them, shares them, and refuses to forget.